Hello from Mindset Daily, wishing you a day full of health, peace, and happiness. Thank you for watching the Mindset Daily channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support us. Thank you so much. Have you ever felt like your light makes others uncomfortable? What if the people closest to you were never meant to stay? And could it be that some were sent not to help you, but to stop you? My friend, lean in and listen carefully. Your life is not a mistake. You weren't placed here by chance. Long before you ever took your first breath, God had already designed a purpose just for you, a sacred assignment that no one else could fulfill. It had your name on it from the very beginning. But somewhere along the way, people entered your life who failed to see your worth. Worse, they noticed your light, and instead of nurturing it, they tried to snuff it out. Some of you have spent years bending, breaking, and bleeding just to make others feel at ease. You gave and gave, not out of weakness, but because your heart was pure. You weren't trying to prove anything. You were trying to love, to help, to heal. You held others together even as you were quietly falling apart. But here's the truth I need you to hear. You cannot fulfill your divine calling while constantly patching up people who are dedicated to their own destruction, or worse, invested in your downfall. Some people were never meant to sit in the front row of your life, yet you welcomed them in because you believed in their potential. You gave them your trust, your time, and your tears. But not everyone who enters your life comes from God. Some are sent by the enemy, disguised as allies, with one mission: to pull you off the path God laid before you. That's not paranoia. That's spiritual discernment. And unless we recognize it, we'll keep pouring sacred energy into people who were only ever meant to sabotage our spirit. God didn't create you to live drained, defeated, and depressed. He created you to live on purpose, with strength, clarity, and peace. God created you to walk in purpose, to shine with confidence, and to live boldly under His grace. But let's be honest. How can you truly rise when every time you try to stand tall, someone close to you finds a way to pull you back down? How can you embrace your calling when every conversation leaves you doubting your worth, replaying every word in your head like you're the one who's broken? And how can you possibly run the race set before you when you're carrying people who refuse to move? People who've made comfort and chaos their home. There comes a turning point, a sacred moment when you have to stop asking, "Why did they hurt me like that?" and start asking, "Why did I keep allowing it?" A moment when you stop rewriting stories in their favor and start accepting the truth that's been in front of you all along. Because here's what the truth sounds like. They didn't damage you by accident. No, it was intentional. They saw your light, and it reminded them of what they had lost, or never had to begin with. They saw your joy, and it made them bitter. They recognized your kindness, and they took advantage. They looked at your purpose, and they tried to poison it. And the hardest part? They smiled in your face while doing it. But listen closely. Just because they meant it for harm doesn't mean God can't turn it into healing. Just because their intentions were cruel doesn't mean your future has to carry that pain. God can transform every betrayal into a blessing. He can take every heartbreak and shape it into a higher calling. But you have to do your part. You have to partner with Him. That means letting go of people who only feel secure when you're shattered. That means no longer putting yourself last in a life God designed for greatness. You were never meant to be depleted so others could thrive. There's a reason Scripture tells you to guard your heart. Not just open it, not just share it freely, but guard it. Because out of your heart flows everything that defines your life. Your peace, your purpose, your identity. And if you hand it to the wrong people, they'll rewrite your story with lies. They'll speak death over what God has breathed life into. And you'll be left wondering why joy keeps slipping through your fingers like sand, no matter how tightly you try to hold on. I'm not telling you to shut down or become cold. I'm telling you to be wise. I'm not telling you to be selfish. I'm telling you to be strategic. You can love others deeply without losing yourself in the process. You can serve faithfully without surrendering your soul. God never asked you to die on a cross for people who willingly crucify your peace. That sacrifice was already made. Now it's your time to rise. Time to recognize the treasure God placed inside you. It's time to stop waiting for others to validate your value. Time to stop shrinking yourself to fit into places God never meant for you to belong. You don't need their approval. You don't need their apology. What you need, what you've always needed, is alignment with heaven. That's where your real strength has always been. True direction doesn't come from the noise of broken people shouting their opinions. It comes from the still, small voice of a holy God who never once questioned your worth. And if walking in that truth means walking alone for a season, so be it. If it means facing betrayal in silence rather than fighting battles that drain your soul, let it be. And if it means closing the door on people who only ever show up to take, then close it with peace in your heart and leave it closed. Why? Because your energy matters. Your purpose is too sacred. Your destiny is far too important to keep wasting on people who never had the capacity to honor it. Yes, they damaged you on purpose, but here's the good news. God will restore you with purpose. He will rebuild every part of you that was torn down, not just to bring you back to who you were, but to raise you into someone stronger, wiser, and more discerning than before. And this time, you won't be begging for crumbs when heaven is trying to prepare a feast for you. You'll know your worth. You'll walk in your mission. And you'll never again allow broken people to define the life God already made whole. You were never called to carry what others destroyed. You were called to rise in what God redeemed. Let's be honest. Not everyone in your life was sent to love you. Not everyone showed up to build you. Some came with smiles on the outside, but with destruction hidden on the inside. And if you're not watchful, if you don't listen with spiritual clarity, you'll confuse their presence for a blessing, when in reality, they were a burden wrapped in disguise. You see, not everyone comes into your life to build something beautiful. Some come only to break. They arrive with confusion, with distraction, with delay, and they often wear the mask of friendship, love, or loyalty. And if you're not rooted in discernment, if you don't pause to truly see, you could spend years watering relationships that were never meant to grow in the first place. Some of you have been asking yourself over and over, what did I do wrong? You've been carrying guilt, replaying conversations, and blaming yourself for the outcome. But here's the truth, you didn't do anything wrong. Your only mistake was not recognizing who they truly were. You assumed their heart mirrored yours. You thought that because you'd never harm them, they'd never harm you. But the reality is, people don't always treat you according to who you are. They treat you according to who they are. And if their heart is bitter, if their soul is filled with envy, if their identity is rooted in insecurity, no amount of kindness from you can heal what's been broken inside them. You could pour yourself out endlessly, and it still wouldn't soften a heart hardened by jealousy or pride. Some people will come close to you not to support you, but to study you. They'll listen to your dreams, nod at your plans, even pretend to cheer for your growth. But behind closed doors, their intention is to ensure you never rise beyond them. Have you ever noticed how they fall silent when something good happens in your life? How they fade into the background the moment God begins to bless you? You've wondered why they never clap when you succeed, why they avoid you when you're full of joy. It's because they were never truly with you. They were only close enough to keep you within reach, close enough to monitor your growth, but never invested in it. Because if you ever surpassed them, it would expose the parts of themselves they never healed. In today's world, jealousy doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through false encouragement. Sometimes it disguises itself as praise, just sharp enough to wound, but soft enough to sound supportive. That's how subtle envy works. And if you're not careful, you'll mistake it for love. Sometimes the most dangerous voices come disguised as well-meaning advice, suggestions that urge you to shrink back, tone it down, or play it safe. And yet, that's always been the enemy's tactic. Subtle, quiet doubt. He didn't shout in the Garden of Eden. He whispered, and he's still whispering today, often through the very people we thought we could trust. That's why you can't give everyone unlimited access to your life. Just because someone shows up doesn't mean they were sent. Just because they say all the right things doesn't mean they're carrying the right spirit. There are people who smile while you struggle, who clap while secretly hoping you fall. And if you're not discerning, you'll confuse their presence for support, when in reality, They've been draining your strength little by little. The enemy knows he doesn't always need to destroy you loudly. All he has to do is surround you with the wrong voices. Voices that delay your destiny, keep you second-guessing yourself, and subtly pull you away from your purpose. But thank God, he promises wisdom to those who ask for it. And sometimes, that wisdom won't look like a miracle. Sometimes, wisdom looks like distance. Sometimes it means stepping back from relationships that once felt safe. Wisdom may sound like silence, like choosing to walk away from the very people you once cried to. It may look like choosing peace over people-pleasing, because peace doesn't come from keeping everyone happy. It comes from keeping your circle clean, focused, and spiritually aligned. Even Jesus, the Son of God, didn't entrust himself to everyone. He ministered to multitudes, yes, but he only confided in a few. He knew what was in the hearts of people, and he chose his inner circle with discernment and intention. If even Jesus, perfect in wisdom, was careful with whom he allowed close, how much more careful should we be? Because when the wrong people stay too long, their influence starts to seep in. They don't just impact your emotions, they begin to shape your thinking. Suddenly, you're holding back. Not because God hasn't called you forward, but because someone else's opinion has grown louder than his voice in your life. You start shrinking your dreams just so others around you can feel comfortable. You start lowering your standards so they won't feel convicted by your growth. But here's the truth. You were never called to dim your light to make others feel secure. You were created to shine fully, confidently, and unapologetically in the fullness of who God made you to be. So don't apologize for evolving. Don't second-guess yourself for setting healthy boundaries. That's not arrogance. That's wisdom. That's protection. And you have every right to protect what God is building in your life. You have every right to guard the vision, the peace, and the future he's entrusted to you. You are under no obligation to keep people in your life who only show up to take, who drain your energy, cloud your clarity, and never give back. Just because someone's been around for years doesn't mean they deserve access forever. Longevity is not the same as loyalty. Some people were only meant to walk with you for a season, and that season has passed. It's not your fault the story shifted. It's your responsibility to recognize when the chapter has ended. You held on because your heart is loyal, because you see the best in people. But don't confuse loyalty with self-sabotage. Don't keep feeding what's been starving your spirit. Don't keep praying for change in someone who's already shown you exactly who they are, repeatedly. This isn't about bitterness. It's about clarity. It's about removing the blindfold and seeing people, patterns, and intentions for what they really are. Some people were truly sent to build. Others came to break. And once you know which is which, it becomes your responsibility to make the right choices. You weren't created to be a casualty of someone else's dysfunction. You were made to be a vessel of God's glory, strong, purposeful, and whole. So protect your heart, guard your space, and never again confuse destruction for devotion. Never again call someone support when all they've done is sabotage. Here's a truth many of us struggle to face. You cannot pour from an empty vessel. No matter how pure your intentions are, no matter how deep your love runs, if your spirit is empty, drained, exhausted, neglected, you have nothing left to give. God created us for connection, yes, to carry one another's burdens, to serve, to uplift. But he never called us to sacrifice our wholeness for people who refuse to heal. But God never intended for you to be the one carrying the weight all the time. He never designed your soul to be worn thin by constantly pouring energy into people who only take and never pour back. Consider the example of Jesus himself. When the demands of ministry grew, when crowds pressed in from every side, when needs seemed endless and opposition intensified, he didn't just keep pushing forward endlessly. He withdrew. He stepped away to quiet, sacred places. He made time to pray, to be refreshed, to reconnect with the Father. Even the Son of God recognized the importance of restoration. So if Jesus needed to rest, if he needed space to refill his strength, how much more do you? How much more do you need to protect the wellspring of your soul? Yet many of us don't see it that way. Somewhere along the line, we were taught that love means always saying yes. That real sacrifice means constantly putting others ahead of ourselves, even if it costs us everything. We were told that true love looks like pouring ourselves out completely, even if it leaves us broken, exhausted, and spiritually empty. But that's not the kind of love God calls us to. God's love includes wisdom. It includes boundaries. It includes rest. True love knows when to say, enough. It understands that you can't pour out what you don't have. And when you continue giving and giving to people who never give back, when your time, your energy, and your joy are slowly drained, you begin to disappear in the process. You wake up already tired. You go to bed emotionally empty. And the worst part? You lose sight of your purpose. Not because God's purpose for you changed, but because all your energy is spent keeping everyone else afloat. Can you really carry your calling if you've lost yourself trying to save everyone else? You begin to forget that God didn't call you to merely survive. He called you to live abundantly. You forget that He didn't just call you to endure, but to rise in strength, to walk with purpose, to stand tall in the identity He gave you. And somewhere along the way, you start believing that your worth is tied to how much you can do for others, how much you can give, carry, or fix. But your value isn't measured by your usefulness. It's rooted in who you are in Him. Saying no is hard, isn't it? Especially when it's someone you once held close to your heart. Especially when they've been part of your journey for years. But there comes a point when saying no becomes the most loving thing you can do for them and for yourself. Because when you keep saying yes to everyone else's needs while ignoring your own limits, you're not helping them grow. You're not giving them wings to fly. You're teaching them to lean on your sacrifice instead of learning to trust in God's provision. You're enabling dependence when you were meant to inspire independence. The Apostle Paul understood this balance well. He knew the cost of laboring for others, but he also understood the necessity of boundaries. He taught us that while we are called to bear one another's burdens, we're also called to carry our own load. There's a distinction. He recognized that even the strongest soul has a threshold. Even the most faithful servant can only carry so much before they begin to lose strength. Paul modeled a life of both service and stewardship, working hard, serving others with purpose, but also resting, renewing, and refilling his spirit. Think of your soul like a well. When it's full, you have more than enough to nourish the garden of your life and to water the lives of those around you. But when that well runs dry, when you neglect to refill what's being emptied, all you can do is watch the garden wither. You cannot pour life into others if there is none left inside you. So let go of the guilt. Protecting your soul isn't selfish. It's sacred. It's an act of obedience. It's how you honor the gift God has given you. Your life, your calling, your voice, your energy. This body, this spirit, this one precious life, it's a gift. And sometimes you have to pause long enough to recognize that gift. Sometimes you have to step back and say, I need time to be restored. You may need to distance yourself from people who constantly take but never give, who drain your energy without replenishing your soul. There are moments when choosing solitude over stress, prayer over pressure, and rest over burnout is the most sacred decision you can make. Because God is not glorified in His children running on empty. He is not pleased when we're barely hanging on, worn thin and broken down. He delights in seeing you walk in His strength, bold, steady, and full of life. He delights when you shine His light without it flickering from exhaustion. When you stand firm in your calling without sacrificing your sanity to meet everyone's demands. Remember, Jesus didn't just speak about love, He modeled it. And part of that love was knowing when to step away. He knew when to pause, when to rest, and when to refill His spirit. If even Jesus practiced restoration, how much more should we? We are called to follow His example, not just in service, but in stewardship. That means being intentional caretakers of our own hearts, our minds, and our bodies. Only when you are whole can you be a true blessing to others. You were never meant to be an endless fountain pouring into everyone else while your own soul runs dry. You were made to thrive. You were made to be renewed, day by day, to live in peace and power. And that renewal begins the moment you prioritize your own spiritual health, your emotional well-being, and your physical rest. It's not a luxury. It's your responsibility. God wants you strong, not only for your own sake, but for those who depend on the light you carry. But how can you be strong if you're always depleted? How can you pour God's love into others if you haven't first allowed His love to fill you? That's why you must protect your energy. Guard your time. Be mindful of who and what you give your heart to. Learn to say no when needed, and say it with grace, with clarity, and without guilt. Because your life, your peace, your purpose depends on it. When you honor yourself, you honor the one who created you. When you care for your spirit, you prepare yourself to serve with depth and sincerity. And when you stop wasting your strength on people who don't value it, you make room for the blessings God has already prepared, waiting for you to be ready to receive them. Don't be afraid to rest. Don't be afraid to recharge. And most importantly, don't be afraid to prioritize yourself. That's not pride, it's wisdom. It's obedience. It's walking in alignment with how God designed you to live. Because when you allow yourself to pause, to refill, to protect your peace, something powerful happens. You begin to walk in freedom. You stop living on empty. You stop pouring from a vessel that's already dry. You begin guarding your soul the way God intended, so that He can fill you up again. And then comes a moment, one that arrives in every life sooner or later. A moment when God brings you face to face with truth. It's a moment of painful clarity. The mask falls off. The veil lifts. And you finally see people, not as you hoped they were, but as they truly are. And yes, it hurts. It hurts deeply, because sometimes the very people you defended, the ones you went out of your way to protect, the ones you believed in with every fiber of your being, they were the ones who saw your goodness as a weakness. They took your loyalty and twisted it. They leaned on your mercy like a crutch, then used it as a weapon. And here's the hardest truth to admit. Some of them didn't just hurt you accidentally. They meant to. And that's not easy to accept, is it? We don't want to believe that people we loved, people we prayed for and trusted, could be capable of that kind of betrayal. So we rationalize. We make excuses. We say things like, maybe they were just going through something. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe if I had just done more, said more, loved harder, they wouldn't have left. But deep down, you feel it in your gut. You recognize the difference between a one-time mistake and a repeated pattern, between a moment of weakness and a heart that's fully set on harm. The people I'm talking about didn't just stumble into hurting you. They chose to. And not just once, but again and again. There are people who study your strength just to learn how to exploit your softness. People who pretend to love you on the surface while secretly resenting everything you carry. People who clap when you fall and vanish into silence when you rise. And when you finally begin to recognize that, when the truth settles in, it shakes you. Because suddenly, you see it wasn't just disappointment. It was betrayal. And it wasn't just forgetfulness. It was neglect with intention. Yes, it was intentional. And acknowledging that truth is painful. But let me tell you something that might bring healing if you're willing to receive it. Recognizing their intent doesn't mean you have to live in bitterness. It doesn't mean you have to carry resentment like a shield. What it does mean is that you finally have permission to stop blaming yourself for what they did. You can finally lay down the burden of guilt you were never meant to carry. You're not the reason they lied. You're not the reason they manipulated. You're not the reason they walked away when you needed them most. Their decisions were not a reflection of your worth. They were a reflection of their character. Think of Joseph. When he stood before his brothers, after they had betrayed him, sold him into slavery, and left him to suffer in silence for years, he didn't pretend like nothing happened. He didn't minimize the pain or excuse their actions. He looked them in the eye and spoke the truth. You meant it for evil. He acknowledged it without sugarcoating the past. But then, Joseph said something remarkable, something holy. He followed that truth with hope, but God meant it for good. There's a sacred strength in being able to face what was done to you, truly see it for what it was, without letting it define who you are. There's power in naming the pain, without becoming the pain. And that's where so many of us get stuck. We try to be strong. We smile through it. We move on with our heads held high. We say, it's fine. I'm fine. But the wound is still there, quietly bleeding beneath the surface. And if we don't deal with it, if we don't bring it into the light of God's truth, it festers. It takes root. It begins to poison the very places in us that were meant for love, for trust, for joy. And without realizing it, we lose the ability to believe again, to connect again, to dream again. That's why this moment matters. Because healing doesn't begin with denial. It begins with honesty. The honest truth is, yes, they knew exactly what they were doing. Yes, they chose to damage you. And yes, it hurt more than you ever let on. But here's where grace enters the story. What they meant to break you, God will use to build you. What they meant to silence, God will use to strengthen. What they tried to tear down, God is getting ready to raise up, higher than it's ever been. But here's the truth. You can't step into the future still holding the weight of your past. You can't fully receive healing while clinging to the very people who caused the harm. There are certain doors God simply won't open, not because you're unworthy, but because you haven't yet closed the ones that were never meant to be opened in the first place. There are blessings being delayed, not because God is withholding, but because you're still entertaining conversations, connections, and attachments that were sent to distract you, not to develop you. You have to protect your purpose like your life depends on it, because in many ways, it does. You have to guard the oil, the anointing, the divine assignment God has placed on your life. Not everyone deserves access to you, not because you think you're above them, but because you are chosen, and chosen people have to live with clarity. You can still love them. You can still forgive them. You can even pray for them with a sincere heart. But that doesn't mean you have to keep them close. That doesn't mean you should keep second-guessing what God already made clear. You're not crazy. You're not weak. You're not too sensitive. You saw what you saw. You felt what you felt. You discerned what you needed to discern. And now, it's time to release it. Letting go doesn't mean it didn't matter. It means you matter more. Your peace matters more. Your future matters more. The destiny God has set before you is far too important to let the past keep poisoning it. The enemy would love nothing more than for you to believe that what happened to you disqualified you, that the damage was too deep, the wound too lasting, the betrayal too final. But God says something entirely different. God says the very damage they meant to destroy you with, He will use to glorify Himself through you. You are not disqualified. You are destined. You are not broken beyond repair. You are being rebuilt, stronger, wiser, more radiant than ever before. And those who try to bury you, they're about to witness what happens when God steps in and breathes life back into what others tried to destroy. So don't let their intentions define your identity. Don't wear what they did as your label, because what they meant to damage, God will use to deliver. Let God step in. There's a reason Scripture tells us to guard our hearts, not just to keep evil out, but to keep peace in. Because when you've been betrayed, when your kindness has been mistaken for weakness, when your open hands have been slapped instead of held, something inside begins to shut down. You start seeing the world differently. You become guarded, suspicious. You begin to question everyone. You stop building boundaries and start building walls. You assume every new voice is just another echo of the last person who hurt you. But listen closely. Don't let one season of pain convince you that love is a lie. That's exactly what the enemy wants, to make you so wounded by what people did to you that you never trust again. He wants you to become so bitter, so closed off, that you start mistaking isolation for healing. But true healing, the kind only God can give, isn't about retreating from the world and hiding forever. It's not about shutting down. It's about learning to be wise without becoming hard. It's about learning how to protect your peace without surrendering your purpose. Not everyone deserves access to your life. Not everyone should be seated at your table. And that's not pride. That's discernment. Some people weren't sent by God. They were allowed, but not assigned. They came as distractions, as tests, even as sandpaper, to reveal what still needed refining in you. They were never meant to stay, but we often hold on anyway. We confuse assignment with attachment. We convince ourselves that if we just love a little harder, try a little longer, they'll change. That our effort will finally be enough. But the truth? They don't change. And we end up drained, confused, and ashamed, wondering why we keep ending up in the same painful place, with different faces but the same patterns. Let me tell you something important. Just because someone walks into your life doesn't mean they belong in it. Just because they speak the right words doesn't mean they carry the right spirit. And just because you can carry people doesn't mean it's your assignment to fix them. You are not their savior. You are not their solution. You were never created to be someone's emotional punching bag while calling it love. Because when you don't protect your peace, when you stop guarding your heart, you start to normalize chaos. You start expecting dysfunction. And little by little, you forget what healthy even looks like. You begin to live with low expectations because, for so long, that's all you've ever known. Disappointment became familiar. Chaos became normal. But just because something feels familiar doesn't mean it's from God. Because God never called you to settle. He didn't rescue you just so you could barely survive, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. He didn't redeem you so you could live stuck in cycles of fear or heartbreak. God called you to walk in the fullness of His promises. Peace isn't a luxury reserved for a select few. It's not something you earn through suffering or performance. Peace is part of your inheritance as His child. Jesus Himself said, "My peace I give to you, not as the world gives." And His peace? It doesn't come with strings attached. It doesn't require you to drain yourself just to gain someone's approval. It doesn't leave you when other people walk away. His peace is steady. It's deep. It's sustaining. But here's the thing. You can't receive that kind of peace fully while still clinging to what keeps disturbing it. You have to let go of what's loud. You have to walk away from the noise, even if that noise comes from people you once loved. Even if it means distancing yourself from what's familiar. Even if it hurts. Even if it's someone you thought would be in your life forever. Because peace doesn't grow where chaos is constantly fed. People who truly carry peace in their hearts don't live in constant turmoil. They're not reactive. They're not always chasing closure or picking battles. They don't fight to prove their worth or beg for belonging. They stand in stillness. They know who they are and whose they are. And that kind of peace, it doesn't come from people. It doesn't come from applause. It comes from a deep, rooted relationship with God. A trust that says, even if everyone walks away, I am still whole. Even if I stand alone, I still stand in grace. Even if it hurts, I know I'm being held by the one who heals. I know it's not easy. Walking away never is. Choosing solitude over shared pain is one of the hardest decisions you'll ever make. But sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to choose silence over struggle. Sometimes, protecting your peace means letting people go quietly, without explanations, without guilt. Sometimes, it means turning down the noise of the world so you can finally hear the voice of God again. Because when you let go of what harms you, you make space for what heals you. When you stop chasing people who never truly saw your worth, you create room for those who will honor you the way God already does. You weren't created to live in constant survival mode. You weren't designed to endure emotional damage in the name of loyalty or faithfulness. You are a temple of the Holy Spirit. And that temple, your heart, your mind, your soul, deserves peace. Protecting your peace may start looking a lot like saying no more often. It may mean fewer calls, fewer explanations, fewer invitations. It may mean deleting numbers that once meant everything to you. Contacts tied to memories you thought would last forever. But let me assure you, what you're letting go of doesn't compare to what you're gaining. You're gaining clarity. You're gaining strength. You're regaining your voice, the one that got lost in the noise. And perhaps most importantly, you're gaining the ability to hear God again, clearly, deeply, without interference. You owe no one access to your peace if they've consistently brought you pain. You owe no one closeness if they've proven untrustworthy with your vulnerability. Forgiveness? Yes, that's free. But reconciliation? That has to be earned. And peace? Peace is priceless. Don't hand it over so easily. Don't let anyone rob you of the very thing God gave you to sustain you. Protect your peace. Guard your joy. Keep your heart soft. Yes, but keep your boundaries strong. Because one of the hardest choices you'll ever have to make is to keep moving forward when everything in you wants to turn back. To take the next step when the weight of the past is still heavy on your shoulders. When the pain is loud and the silence feels unbearable. When your heart is raw from the storm and your mind won't stop replaying every word, every moment, every betrayal. But even there, in that confusion, in that ache, God is still calling you forward. forward in faith, forward in purpose, forward in healing. Because what lies ahead of you is still greater than what's behind you. You may not see it yet. You may still be standing in the smoke of everything that's been torn down. But in the ashes of what they broke, God is building beauty. A new beginning, a deeper strength, a more refined version of you. There's something sacred being prepared for you, something so holy, so set apart, that it could only come once you first released what was never meant to stay. Sometimes God doesn't allow certain people to go with you, not because you're unloving, but because they were never meant to walk where He's taking you. They don't carry the reverence for the call on your life. They don't understand the weight of your purpose. And that's okay, because your journey requires clarity. Your calling demands protection, and your peace is worth preserving. And if they were to stay, they would only damage the very thing God is trying to restore in you. That's why you can't go back. That's why you can't spend your nights replaying every detail, trying to figure out what you could have done differently. You can't keep rehearsing conversations that never brought closure. You can't keep writing apologies for wounds you never caused. There's a line in the sand now, and once God shows you the truth, He expects you to walk in it. Not everyone you lose is truly a loss. Some people were lessons. Some were mirrors, showing you the parts of yourself you were too afraid to face. Some were divine disruption, the push you needed to stop placing your hope in people and return your eyes to the one who never fails. Yes, they damaged you. Yes, they knew what they were doing. But their plan is not more powerful than God's purpose for your life. And you've come too far to let what they did be the final word spoken over your story. You've cried too many tears in silence. You've carried too many questions no one ever answered. You've grown too much, fought too long, to go back to the version of yourself that needed their validation just to feel worthy. You don't need their apology to heal. You don't need their approval to move forward. You don't even need their understanding to reclaim your peace. What you do need is the strength to take the next step. Just one step. One step closer to healing. One step closer to purpose. One step closer to the future God already wrote with your name on it. It might feel slow. It might feel small. It might feel like nothing is changing. But forward, no matter how quiet or gradual, is still forward. Don't despise the small steps. Don't underestimate the power of simply getting up again. Every time you choose not to react in anger, you're moving forward. Every time you forgive when it still hurts, you're moving forward. Every time you decide to pray instead of panic, to worship instead of worry, to walk away instead of retaliate, you are moving forward. And let me tell you something that matters more than you know. There's a blessing that only obedience can unlock. When God sees that you're willing to trust Him, even over your emotions, when He sees that you've stopped looking to people for your worth, something powerful begins to shift. That's when He starts opening doors no person can shut. That's when He begins restoring areas of your life you didn't even know were broken. He starts aligning divine connections, bringing people into your life who love you purely, without hidden agendas. People who pray for you, not control you. People who see your calling, not just your usefulness. People who cover you in grace, not guilt. But before that can happen, a decision must be made. You have to declare, I'm not going back. I'm not shrinking myself just to fit into the old version of me that once tolerated disrespect. I'm not staying in cycles just because they're comfortable. I'm not handing access to people who once used closeness as a weapon to wound me. I am walking forward. I am becoming whole. I'm choosing peace over performance, purpose over people-pleasing, destiny over drama. And yes, it takes courage. Courage to say goodbye to places that once felt like home, even if they're not healthy anymore. Courage to walk alone for a season while God rebuilds your foundation. Courage to trust that even through pain, His plan is still good. Because He's not finished yet. But the reward? The reward is worth every tear, every lonely step, every surrendered yes. The healing is real. The joy is on the other side of this obedience. And the version of you that's waiting beyond this valley? She's strong. She's whole. She's no longer afraid of being misunderstood. She doesn't waste energy explaining herself to those who are determined not to listen. She doesn't settle for halfway love, almost friendships, or one-sided loyalty. She no longer questions her value based on who recognizes it. Because she's learned something most never do. Being alone with God is better than being surrounded by people who make you doubt who you are. So walk forward. Limp if you have to. Crawl if that's all you can manage. But whatever you do, Don't stay in what God has already called you out of. Don't build your life around what broke you. Don't settle into survival mode and call it peace. Don't decorate the walls of your prison just because it's familiar. You were never meant to stay trapped in places God intends to deliver you from. You were made for more than this moment. You were created for freedom, real freedom. Not just from others' expectations, but from the pain that tried to define you. You were destined to rise from this. Yes, what they did was real. Yes, the wound was deep. But even in that pain, God is writing a bigger story. They may have meant to break you, but God is using every piece, every scar, every silent tear as part of a greater testimony. A testimony that will not only bring healing to you, but light to others walking through their own darkness. So keep walking, even if you're still limping, even if you're not sure where the next step leads. Just keep walking, because every step forward is a step into restoration, strength, and the freedom that was always yours. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Wishing you strength, peace, and deep joy in every step you take. Remember to stay well, stay hopeful, and don't forget to subscribe to Mindset Daily for more encouragement, clarity, and purpose-driven content. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.